January 1943. The kind of cold that seeped into. In the Ruhr Valley, the hum of the Wehrmacht's factories was faint, almost weary, as if the machines themselves sensed the impossible task ahead. Orders were piling in, directives from Berlin insisting on more, faster, stronger. Yet the war had grown beyond Hitler's ambitions. At Henchel's factory in Kassel, Karl Richter wiped sweat from his brow, though the winter chill should have kept him dry. At 42, Karl was a master welder, a craftsman who had spent decades bending and shaping steel for locomotives, for bridges, for machines meant to carry life, not death. Now he was crafting Panzers. Each tank was a fortress of precision-engineered armor and firepower, every bolt, every rivet, a testament to human skill and discipline. To Karl, each Panzer represented both pride and dread. He knew these machines were formidable, capable of obliterating dozens of enemy tanks in the right hands, yet he also understood the shadow that loomed over every battlefield: numbers, logistics, the relentless arithmetic of war. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Inside a small, dimly lit briefing room, General Erich von Falkenhausen traced his finger over the production charts. 1,300 Panzers this year, he muttered, almost to himself. His voice carried no triumph, only a quiet tension that mirrored the unease in his officers' eyes. Each vehicle was a marvel of engineering, yes, but the reports coming in from the Eastern Front painted a troubling picture. American and British armoured divisions were advancing with unstoppable momentum, moving faster than intelligence had predicted. Each Panzer required time, precision, and skilled operators, yet the Allies had something the Germans lacked: mass. Endless waves of tanks, thousands at a time, pouring from factories across the Atlantic. Von Falkenhausen's hand lingered on the chart, as if trying to will the numbers to balance, to somehow make the German total sufficient. He knew it was not enough. 1,300 Panzers were too few to change the course of what was coming. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Detroit, Michigan, told a different story. At the Chrysler Detroit tank arsenal, the roar of assembly lines echoed across the massive factory floor, filling the air with heat, steel, and a rhythm that felt almost alive. Mary Thompson, a young welder of 26, tightened the final bolt on a Sherman tank turret, her gloved hands moving with practiced speed. She glanced up at the production board, the numbers flickering like a pulse. 1,500 tanks this month, 2,000 the next, 17,500 by the end of the year. She shook her head slightly, incredulous. Each Sherman was simple enough that nearly any worker could assemble it. Its design prioritized repair and maintenance in the field, meaning that a crew with only basic tools could keep it running. The Shermans were not masterpieces of engineering like the German Panzers or Tigers. They were machines built for endurance, for resilience, for repetition. Every bolt, every plate, every engine component was standardized, interchangeable, replaceable, allowing for speed and scale that the Germans could never match. The contrast could not have been starker. In Kassel, Karl Richter labored over a single Panzer for weeks, meticulous in every weld, checking alignment, ensuring that every gear and sprocket met exacting standards. At Detroit, Mary and thousands of others worked in synchronized harmony, the assembly lines moving like clockwork, creating a Sherman every 4 to 6 hours. Karl's Panzers were magnificent, unmatched in individual capability, yet they came at a cost: time, effort, and the limitations of human hands. Mary's Shermans were simple, sturdy, and most importantly replaceable. As one tank was destroyed on the battlefield, another could arrive within days, sometimes within hours, tipped onto beaches, rail lines, and roadways across Europe. Industrial arithmetic had begun its quiet, inexorable victory, and the Germans would soon discover its full force. By March, the gulf between German skill and American numbers had become undeniable. 1,300 Panzers faced 17,000 Shermans, ready to descend from America's shores. The disparity was not just in quantity, but in strategy and sustainability. Hitler's engineers scoffed at the tin cans produced by the Americans, convinced that German precision would prevail over sheer mass. They reminded themselves that one Tiger or Panther could destroy a dozen Shermans in skilled hands. Yet no matter how tactically brilliant a German tank commander was, each encounter against waves of Shermans began to feel like fighting a tide. The German machines were limited, their crews exhausted, their supply lines stretched thin, while the Americans seemed endless, unstoppable, a continuous stream of armor, fuel, and trained personnel. The arithmetic of production was more ruthless than any battlefield maneuver, and already the Wehrmacht's hope wavered. In Kassel, Karl paused, staring down the length of the steel hull in front of him. He had worked on this Panzer for weeks, bending over it, checking each weld, each joint, until perfection had almost become a habit. Yet perfection was no longer enough. Each month, reports came in showing the relentless American output: Detroit, Fisher body, Lima locomotive, Pullman standard, 12 factories working in concert, producing thousands of tanks with the precision of a clockwork army. Even the most brilliant Tiger could not withstand a force backed by numbers of this scale. Karl's chest tightened. For the first time, he felt his work might be futile, the value of human skill undermined by industrial mathematics. The tension between quality and quantity, between mastery and mass, had become the battlefield itself. Across the Atlantic, Mary Thompson adjusted the turret of her Sherman, checking the rivets, feeling the weight of steel in her palms. Around her, fellow workers moved with quiet determination, a rhythm born of purpose and necessity. They were not making masterpieces. They were making war machines designed to endure, to be repaired, to multiply. Each tank was a promise of persistence, a physical embodiment of the Allied strategy. Overwhelm the enemy not by brilliance alone, but by relentless numbers, unceasing, unbroken, unstoppable. By the end of the year, 17,500 Shermans would leave American factories. For each German Panzer, there would be 13 Shermans waiting, lined up, fueled, armed, and ready to push forward. By May, the Wehrmacht could no longer ignore the implications. Reports from the eastern and western fronts showed the same pattern: skilled crews, heroic defences, brilliant tactical victories, but always faced with a wave of replacements, a tide of simple but sufficient tanks that arrived faster than the Panzers could be repaired, faster than the crews could reload, faster than commanders could react. The arithmetic of war was brutal, indifferent, and impartial. 1,300 German tanks, no matter how technically superior, could not match 17,000 Shermans in operational effectiveness. The numbers were already dictating the outcome. General Erich von Falkenhausen reviewed the latest intelligence once again. His finger traced the columns of data: factories, monthly outputs, projected reinforcements. 17,500 Shermans, 1,300 Panzers. The numbers weighed on him more heavily than any artillery shell. He had studied warfare his entire career, yet he realized that strategy alone could not overcome such disparity. Even battlefield genius would be rendered insufficient in the face of relentless, industrially enforced numbers. The Wehrmacht's hope, fragile and unspoken, began to crumble under the weight of production statistics. In the heart of Kassel, Karl Richter and his team of master craftsmen continued their work with grim determination. They bent and welded, soldered and polished, constructing each Panzer with care that bordered on obsession. Yet outside the factory walls, the world was changing. Rail lines carried newly minted Shermans to ports, to convoys, to the European theatre. In England, the tanks were prepared, supplied, and tested. Crews trained relentlessly, familiarized themselves with every function, every lever, every engine sound. American industrial philosophy prioritized speed, simplicity, and sustainability. Germany's pride in meticulous craftsmanship, once an advantage, now appeared to be a liability. By summer, the Wehrmacht faced a stark reality. On paper, German tanks remained superior in armor, firepower, and engineering sophistication. On the ground, they were increasingly overwhelmed by sheer quantity. German crews could destroy dozens of Shermans in any engagement, yet reinforcements always arrived, every loss replaced by 2, 3, 4 more. Supply lines that took days or weeks to deliver specialized parts for a Tiger or Panther could not match the American logistical machine, which kept Shermans in operation, constantly repaired and ready for battle. The arithmetic of war was undeniable. Quality alone could no longer secure victory. Across the Atlantic, Detroit's factories continued to hum. Mary Thompson moved from one tank to the next, her hands never idle, her mind focused on the task ahead. Every bolt tightened, every engine checked, every turret aligned was another Sherman ready for the front, another piece of America's industrial might sent to face the Wehrmacht. The workers, many of them young women and teenagers, understood the significance of their labor. They were not just building tanks, they were building endurance, resilience, and inevitability. Every day that passed, the numbers increased, and with them, the pressure on German forces intensified. By autumn, the contrast had become a legend among military planners. 1,300 Panzers, individually magnificent but few in number, against 17,000 Shermans, simple, numerous, and inexhaustible. The arithmetic of production dictated the battlefield long before the first shots were fired. German commanders, once confident in the superiority of their machines, now faced a growing unease. No longer could tactical brilliance alone secure victory. Industrial scale, logistics, and relentless reinforcement had become the decisive factors. The Germans had skill, the Americans had numbers. And numbers, as the Wehrmacht was about to discover, could crush even the most brilliant genius. By winter, the reality of this imbalance had permeated every level of command. Supply officers calculated fuel shortages, maintenance crews counted hours needed to repair intricate panzers, and generals plotted engagements knowing that reinforcements would be slow, inconsistent, and scarce. In contrast, the Allied logistical apparatus functioned like a living organism. Sherman after Sherman was ready, fueled, and crewed, the numbers swelling with each passing day. For every German victory on the battlefield, there were 2, 3, or 4 Allied tanks waiting to replace the lost machines, turning even tactical brilliance into an exercise in futility. At Henchel's factory, Karl Richter paused to look at the Panzer he had just completed. It gleamed under the factory lights, a monument to human skill and engineering. Yet in his heart, a seed of doubt had grown. He understood the war would not be won by the magnificence of individual machines, but by the relentless arithmetic of production. Outside, across the ocean, Mary Thompson and thousands of workers continued their task with quiet determination, unaware of Karl's doubts. Yet each Sherman that rolled off the line carried with it the unspoken truth. Numbers, logistics, and persistence would dictate the outcome of the war. The Germans had skill, the Americans had numbers, and numbers, as the Wehrmacht was about to learn, were absolute. By the end of the year, the contrast was undeniable. 1,300 German Panzers had been built, each a testament to engineering excellence and human dedication. 17,500 Shermans had rolled off American assembly lines, simple, sturdy, and inexhaustible. The arithmetic of war had spoken. The Wehrmacht's hope, founded on skill, precision, and tactical brilliance, faltered beneath the weight of industrial reality. The stage was set for the inevitable clash of numbers versus mastery, quantity versus quality, endurance versus perfection. Hitler's war machine, once the pinnacle of engineering, was now a fragile monument to an ideology that underestimated the power of industrial scale. And as Karl Richter prepared to begin another Panzer, and Mary Thompson moved on to the next Sherman, the war had already begun to tilt. The Panzers were magnificent, but 17,500 Shermans awaited. The Wehrmacht had skill, the Americans had numbers, and in the cold arithmetic of 1943, numbers were absolute, relentless, and ultimately victorious. Near Normandy, the summer sun glared off the steel of Hauptmann Michael Wittmann's Tiger tank, reflecting in his eyes like a cruel reminder of the day's work. Around him, 3 other Tigers rumbled, their engines vibrating through the earth like distant thunder. The Panzer division had been engaged for hours, carving swaths of destruction through advancing Sherman formations. Each Tiger was a masterpiece of German engineering, a fortress of armour and firepower, equipped with the 88mm gun that could annihilate any Sherman at distances previously thought impossible. Wittmann, 32, had joined the Wehrmacht at 19, driven by a mix of patriotism and ambition. He had earned every promotion through skill, discipline, and an almost obsessive attention to detail. Today, he felt the weight of that skill more acutely than ever. The battlefield was his domain, every decision a calculus of life and death, every movement of his tank a ballet of lethal precision. He counted the wreckage. 27 Shermans lay in smoking craters, twisted hulls scorched black by their precise fire. Wittmann allowed himself a brief moment of grim satisfaction, letting the roar of his engine mask the tension in his chest. Yet, in the distance, the illusion of victory vanished. Fresh Sherman units appeared on the horizon, unblooded, countless, moving in formation like a tide that refused to be held back. 48 more tanks advanced from 3 directions, backed by columns of trucks, fuel convoys, and reinforcements. For every Sherman destroyed by Wittmann's hand, 2 more seemed to take its place, ready, armed, and resolute. The arithmetic of war, invisible yet merciless, was being written before his eyes. His Tigers could destroy a dozen Shermans each, yet they could not destroy the tide of American production, the ceaseless flow of machines that poured into the European theatre. Across the Atlantic, the story of those arriving Shermans unfolded in factories and training grounds far removed from the smoke and chaos of Normandy. At the Chrysler Detroit Tank Arsenal, workers moved with relentless precision, welding, riveting, and assembling the components of what Mary Thompson, 26, described simply as a machine that fights and survives. Teenage girls, housewives, and former automobile workers handled the metal and engines with careful determination, producing Sherman tanks at a pace that German engineers could scarcely imagine. The modular design allowed components to be built in parallel on different assembly lines, then combined into fully operational tanks within hours. By the end of the year, 17,500 Shermans would have rolled from these factories. It was an industrial machine powered not by genius, but by repetition, discipline, and scale, a machine designed to overwhelm, to endure, and to replace losses faster than the enemy could destroy them. At Fort Knox, Kentucky, the difference in preparedness became evident. Private Clarence Smuyer, 19, remembered the drills vividly. We learned every bolt, every nut, every sound the Sherman engine made. Within a month, we could repair the tank blindfolded. We drilled until it became instinct. Every break, every shot fired, every simulated battle, it made us faster, smarter, relentless. The Americans understood that war was not only fought on the battlefield, but in factories, schools, and training grounds. While the German Tiger required a crew trained over months to achieve proficiency, a Sherman could be mastered in weeks by men who, despite being young or inexperienced, had the advantage of numbers, simplicity, and redundancy. Each crew, each tank, became a node in an endless network of reinforcement and replacement. The arithmetic of endurance had begun to outweigh the allure of singular brilliance. Back in Normandy, Wittmann observed the advancing Shermans with grim calculation. His Tigers, individually superior, were symbols of German engineering pride, each requiring 300,000 man-hours to complete. Every rivet, every gear, Every weld represented a precision that only the most skilled workers could achieve. The engines were tuned to perfection, the guns capable of leveling armoured formations at unprecedented ranges. Yet the perfection of these machines carried a hidden cost. Production was slow, repair was complicated, and logistics strained under the complexity of each tank. Replacement parts were specialized, scarce, and required skilled technicians to install. Each destroyed Tiger was a loss that could not be remedied swiftly. Even with the most brilliant commanders, the limitations of production, repair, and deployment became vulnerabilities, and those vulnerabilities were now exposed. In contrast, the Sherman tanks arriving from American factories embodied a philosophy of practical sufficiency. They were not the most sophisticated tanks on the battlefield. Their armor could be penetrated, their guns less powerful, and their design simpler. Yet every aspect of their construction had been designed for speed, maintainability, and interchangeability. Engines could run on multiple types of fuel. Armor plates could be welded or replaced in the field. Tracks could be swapped in 90 minutes. Turrets could be repaired or replaced without specialized tools. The Americans traded perfection for resilience, mass, and adaptability. For every Sherman destroyed, another could arrive within hours. For every loss, crews were trained to repair, replace, and re-engage. Where German tanks were masterpieces of engineering, the Shermans were machines of endurance, the perfect embodiment of industrial might. The contrast between the two approaches was stark and unyielding. Whitman's Tigers moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine, capable of annihilating enemy formations. Yet they faced a relentless enemy that could not be broken by skill alone. Across the fields of Normandy, the Sherman tide advanced. Columns of tanks, fueled and armed, crested hills and poured into valleys with an inevitability that defied tactical calculations. Whitman aimed his 88mm gun, firing with deadly accuracy, yet each victory felt temporary, fleeting. For every Sherman destroyed, more arrived, a relentless demonstration of industrial arithmetic that no battlefield maneuver could counter. The Germans had quality, but the Americans had quantity, and in the long war, quantity would dictate survival. The day pressed on. Whitman's Tigers tore through formations, yet the advancing Shermans never ceased. Smoke and fire marked the battle's path, twisted metal and shattered armor littering the fields. Whitman, sweating beneath his helmet, felt both pride and despair. He had destroyed more than 27 Shermans in less than 3 hours. Each crew he outmaneuvered, each tank he demolished, was a testament to German skill. Yet the numbers told a different story. 48 fresh Shermans had appeared while he and his company were engaged, unblooded, operational, ready to replace the losses already sustained. The battlefield became a grim ledger, a calculation of kills versus reinforcements, of destruction versus replacement. And the arithmetic of production, relentless and impartial, was beginning to write its verdict. Back in the factories, American workers continued their labor. Mary Thompson adjusted a turret, welded a seam, inspected an engine. Around her, colleagues moved with quiet precision, aware that every completed Sherman contributed to the broader war effort. Each tank that rolled from the assembly line became a node in an unstoppable network of supply and reinforcement. Across the Atlantic, Fort Knox and other training centers prepared crews to operate, maintain, and repair these machines efficiently. It was a system designed to endure attrition, to sustain momentum, and to transform industrial output into battlefield advantage. Whereas Germany relied on individual skill, experience, and careful craftsmanship, the Allies relied on redundancy, replaceability, and scale. In sheer numbers, in relentless endurance, they were already winning the quiet war of preparation. In the afternoon sun, Whitman's Tigers engaged another, Sherman formation near a shallow ridge. The 88mm guns roared, steel tearing steel, explosions echoing across the valley. Whitman's hands were steady, his mind focused, yet he knew that each kill was a temporary reprieve. Reports filtered through his radio, updates on fresh arrivals, logistical movements, and anticipated reinforcements. For every Sherman they destroyed, 2 more were on the move. The Germans could achieve tactical brilliance, yes, but the strategic picture was increasingly bleak. Industrial might, production speed, and logistical superiority were shaping the battlefield as much as any maneuver, any ambush, or any artillery strike. Whitman's mastery could delay the tide, but it could not stop it. Night fell over Normandy, casting long shadows over the shattered battlefield. Whitman surveyed the field from his hatch, counting wrecks and tracking movements. The Tigers had performed flawlessly, each kill executed with precision and deadly intent. Yet, the field was dotted with new Shermans, moving into position, supplied, fueled, and ready to fight again. Whitman's thoughts turned to the factories, to the crews in Detroit, to the assembly lines that never stopped. Each tank they had destroyed today would be replaced. Each loss would be remedied. The arithmetic of mass production, impersonal and indifferent, had become the ultimate weapon. German skill was formidable, but against relentless numbers, skill alone could not prevail. By midnight, Whitman and his company had withdrawn to a defensive position, exhausted but alive. The Tigers had inflicted heavy losses, but the incoming Sherman tide ensured that the Allies retained operational momentum. Whitman's pride in his crew and his tanks was tempered by the sobering reality of industrial warfare. The battlefield had shifted from individual heroism and tactical genius to endurance, logistics, and production. The Americans had mastered the art of attrition not through brilliance, but through sheer, unstoppable capacity. For every Tiger immobilized, for every kill achieved, the Americans had already planned replacements. For every loss, the Allied war machine pressed on, faster, larger, and inexhaustible. In the end, Whitman understood the truth that day, one that would haunt him and the Wehrmacht for the remainder of the conflict. Skill could win engagements, tactics could secure victories, yet the ultimate arbiter of survival was industrial might. The German Tigers were magnificent, precise, and terrifying. The Shermans were simple, numerous, and enduring. In the war's arithmetic, the scale and endurance of the American production system outweighed the brilliance of German engineering. Numbers, relentless and impartial, dictated the battlefield. One Tiger could destroy a dozen Shermans, but 17,500 Shermans could, in time, overwhelm the mightiest fleet of Tigers. Whitman, 32, felt the weight of inevitability settle upon him. The war was no longer only fought with steel and skill, it was measured in factories, assembly lines, and the ceaseless pulse of industrial America. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. By dawn, the battlefield was quiet but scarred. Wrecked Shermans and battered Tigers lay scattered across the fields. Whitman and his crew counted losses, recalculated strategies, and waited for reinforcements that would not arrive in sufficient numbers. Across the Atlantic, Detroit's factories continued their unceasing rhythm, producing more Shermans, training more crews, and reinforcing the tide that had already begun to shape the war's outcome. Germany had tactical brilliance, America had industrial might, and in the arithmetic of survival, might would prove absolute. By December 1943, the war had reached a point where the arithmetic of armoured warfare was as decisive as the battles themselves. Across the European continent, Germany maintained a total of 1,300 operational Panzers, distributed across multiple fronts: the frozen plains of Russia, the shifting sands of North Africa, and the contested towns of Western Europe. Each vehicle was a masterpiece of engineering, a testament to the meticulous care and expertise of the men and women who had laboured on them. Yet, as impressive as these machines were, they were also fragile in their demands. The complexity that made a Panther or Tiger formidable on the battlefield also slowed deployment, strained supply lines, and demanded maintenance crews with expertise that could not be replicated in haste. Every tank required specialized tools, precision calibration, and a crew of 5 highly trained men who had spent months learning every function, every quirk, and every vulnerability. Fuel shortages, long transport distances, and the ever-present threat of Allied air raids further hampered the Wehrmacht's ability to field its armoured might where it was most needed. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the United States had entered a new phase of armoured warfare, one defined not by perfection, but by scale, reliability, and relentless reinforcement. By December 1943, American factories had delivered 17,500 Sherman tanks to the European theatre. These machines were built not for meticulous artistry, but for endurance and adaptability. Each Sherman could be operated by a crew with basic training, repaired in the field using simple tools, and maintained by men who had never touched a tank before the war. The industrial design emphasized modularity. Engines, transmissions, and turrets could be replaced rapidly. Tracks could be swapped in less than 2 hours, and armor plates could be patched or replaced without disrupting other systems. The American strategy was clear. Keep tanks on the front, replace losses immediately, and outlast the enemy. Red Ball Express convoys moved continuously, trucks laden with fuel, ammunition, and spare parts weaving a lifeline that connected ports to the front lines. Mobile workshops rolled alongside armoured divisions, ready to rebuild, repair, or modify tanks under fire. Air transport could deliver reinforcements overnight. If a Sherman was destroyed in the morning, by the next day a replacement often rolled into position, ready to take the fight again. In contrast, a German Tiger lost today frequently remained immobilized for weeks, awaiting spare parts, skilled mechanics, and clearance from distant command posts. The disparity in production and logistics meant that each engagement, no matter how brilliantly fought, was heavily influenced by arithmetic that could not be overcome by courage alone. On the frost-bitten fields near the Somme, Oberleutnant Friedrich Krauss of the 503rd Panzer Battalion understood this stark reality with painful clarity. Krauss, 34, had been trained in the art of armoured combat from the ground up. He had spent years mastering manoeuvre tactics, gunnery, and coordination with infantry and artillery units. His 4 Panzers were technically superior to the approaching Sherman formations. The 88mm guns of his Tigers could destroy any Sherman in a single shot at a distance of over 2 kilometers, and the Panthers' sloped armor made them resilient to almost any enemy fire. Krauss felt the familiar surge of confidence that had carried him through previous engagements. For a brief moment, he believed that skill, experience, and the technical perfection of his machines could turn the tide of battle. The sound of engines approached, a rhythmic hum growing louder, revealing the first wave of American Shermans. 20 tanks emerged from the horizon, rolling forward in disciplined formation, their crews trained to replace losses and maintain momentum. Krauss gave the order to prepare fire, to aim, and to execute the tactics that had made his battalion feared among Allied forces. He felt a spark of optimism, just enough to steel his nerves for what was to come. The first exchange began with lethal efficiency. Krauss's Tigers unleashed their powerful shells, tearing through the Shermans with clinical precision. Hulls twisted, smoke rose in black plumes, and the cries of men echoed across the cold fields. For a moment, the numbers seemed manageable. Tactical brilliance shone, proving once more the advantage of superior engineering and experience. Krauss directed his crew with calm authority, adjusting aim, coordinating angles of fire, and exploiting every weakness in the enemy formation. Each shot was deliberate, each maneuver precise. In the opening minutes, they destroyed nearly half of the approaching Shermans, and Krauss felt the old thrill of victory, a fleeting validation of all the training, effort, and ingenuity that had gone into the Panzer program. Reinforcements arrived. Another wave of Shermans emerged over the distant rise, engines rumbling, cannons primed, and crews undaunted by the losses that had just occurred. Krauss's Tigers were forced to rotate targets, manage ammunition carefully, and cover each other as the Americans pressed forward. For every tank destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place, and yet another wave followed, relentless and unceasing. The rhythm of their advance dictated not by courage, but by an industrial system that could absorb losses without faltering. Krauss felt the first pangs of frustration, the realization that technical superiority could not offset the relentless march of numbers. The arithmetic of war had shifted. The battlefield was no longer only the domain of strategy, skill, and firepower. It was the domain of production, logistics, and endurance. By mid-afternoon, Krauss and his battalion faced the sobering truth. His 4 Panzers, formidable and meticulously crafted, were surrounded by waves of Shermans, supported by infantry, artillery, and the endless supply of American logistics. Every tactical maneuver was countered, every advantage diluted by the inexorable flow of enemy reinforcements. Ammunition ran low, engines began to overheat, and the stress on crews, already tense from the morning's engagement, mounted. Krauss felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him, knowing that each decision could cost men's lives. Yet, even as the Tigers inflicted damage, the numbers told a story that could not be ignored. 17,500 Shermans had been delivered to Europe, and every loss would be replaced. 1,300 Panzers, no matter how brilliant in combat, were insufficient to stem a tide powered by industrial might. Across the Atlantic, American production lines continued their relentless rhythm. Factories operated day and night, workers taking turns on the assembly lines, welding, riveting, and assembling Sherman tanks with disciplined precision. Mary Thompson, 26, tightened a turret bolt and inspected the final alignment, conscious that each completed tank would soon arrive in the European theatre to sustain the offensive. Teenage girls, retired mechanics, and volunteers from rural communities had become the backbone of this industrial army. Each tank was standardized, simple to operate, and easy to repair. American training programs ensured that crews could operate these machines efficiently, maintain them under combat conditions, and immediately replace any losses. The strategy was simple but effective. Outproduce the enemy, outlast the enemy, and overwhelm the enemy with numbers that no tactical brilliance could counter. Back on the Somme, Krauss and his crew fought desperately, moving, firing, and maneuvering with precision. The Tigers destroyed more Shermans, but the relentless flow of reinforcements continued. Krauss realized that no matter how perfectly executed their tactics, each engagement could only delay the inevitable. The battlefield had become a ledger, each destruction and loss meticulously recorded not only by officers on the ground, but by the industrial centers thousands of miles away. The Americans could calculate, plan, and replace losses faster than any German commander could respond. The arithmetic of survival had overtaken the artistry of combat. By evening, the outcome was evident. Krauss surveyed the battlefield through the frost-covered periscope of his Tiger, counting smoking wrecks of Shermans and the damaged remains of his own Panzers. 4 of his tanks remained operational, but their ammunition was low, and the relentless waves of enemy armor showed no sign of slowing. Krauss understood that skill, courage, and technical superiority could not change the fundamental reality. The Americans had numbers, logistics, and industrial capacity on their side. For every German tank destroyed, a Sherman would arrive within hours, repaired, manned, and ready to fight again. Each engagement, no matter how brilliant, was a temporary reprieve, a delay in a war increasingly decided by the scale of production rather than the heroism of individuals. Night fell over the Somme, casting long shadows across the scarred fields. Krauss and his men took stock, rotating crews, inspecting engines, and preparing for the next day's inevitable engagement. Fires from burning Shermans illuminated the terrain in flickering bursts of orange, a visual testament to the skill and bravery of his battalion. Yet the numbers told a different story, one of inexorable pressure and strategic inevitability. The Americans could replace their tanks, train new crews, and maintain momentum indefinitely. The Germans could not. Each Tiger, each Panther-trained crew was precious, irreplaceable in the short term. The arithmetic of industrial warfare was indifferent to skill, courage, or tradition. It favored production, repetition, and endurance. Krauss knew that in this new age of warfare, numbers had become the decisive weapon. By midnight, Krauss and the surviving crews retreated to a secondary defensive position, battered but still functioning. The battle had inflicted losses on both sides, but the tactical advantage had shifted irreversibly toward the Allies. Across the Atlantic, factories in Detroit, Flint, and across the Midwest continued to produce tanks at an unrelenting pace. Trained crews were being shipped to Europe with the next wave of armoured divisions. The Red Ball Express ensured that tanks, fuel, ammunition, and spare parts were never far from the front lines. The American war machine had transformed industrial capacity into a decisive battlefield advantage, demonstrating that the war could be won not solely through skill or technology, but through scale, speed, and relentless logistical support. Krauss sat in the command turret of his Tiger, exhausted but resolute. He reflected on the irony that the very machines he had once believed could dominate any battlefield were now constrained by the limits of production and supply. The Shermans he faced were not technically superior, but they arrived in overwhelming numbers, repaired quickly, and supported by a logistics system that functioned as a force multiplier. The arithmetic of war was clear. For every German tank deployed, dozens of Shermans could replace it. For every skilled crew, countless trained operators could be brought forward. Numbers, indifferent and impersonal, dictated the tempo, the pressure, and the eventual outcome of engagements across Europe. As dawn broke on December 9th, Krauss observed the distant horizon. Smoke rose from destroyed tanks, fires smouldered across the fields, and the relentless tide of Sherman tanks advanced once more. He understood that this was no longer a war decided by individual brilliance or engineering perfection. It was a war dictated by production, logistics, and the inexorable march of numbers. Each tank, destroyed by his hand, was a victory, yes, but one that would be temporary. Each Sherman arriving reinforced the truth. The Allies had industrial might, and in that arithmetic, the Wehrmacht had already begun to lose ground. Krauss clenched his fists, a mixture of pride and frustration filling him. Tactical brilliance could win battles, but the strategic war, the war of numbers, was slipping beyond his control. In the weeks that followed, the pattern became undeniable. Engagement after engagement, Tiger and Panther crews fought valiantly, yet they could not halt the relentless advance of American armor. The combination of simple, reliable machines, trained crews, and a logistics system designed for rapid reinforcement created a battlefield advantage that even the most skilled German tank commanders could not overcome. The disparity in production meant that attrition worked in favor of the Allies. Each day of combat, each engagement, each defensive stand was a temporary measure against an enemy whose capacity to absorb loss and maintain offensive pressure was unmatched. Oberleutnant Friedrich Krauss, 34, realized that the war had evolved. No longer was it solely the realm of heroism, ingenuity, or technical perfection. It was now a war measured by factories, assembly lines, and the ceaseless movement of men and machines. Germany's 1,300 Panzers were magnificent, deadly, and precise, yet they faced an unstoppable tide of 17,500 Shermans, backed by a logistics system that could sustain, replace, and reinforce endlessly. In this new battlefield reality, numbers had become the ultimate arbiter. Skill could delay, tactics could inflict losses, and courage could inspire, but the inexorable march of production would ultimately determine victory. The arithmetic of war, relentless and impartial, had begun to favor the Allies, and the Wehrmacht would come to understand that no battlefield brilliance could overcome the weight of 17,500 Shermans advancing with unyielding persistence. January 1944 dawned over a Europe still scarred by years of conflict, with snow and frost blanketing towns, forests, and fields. The Wehrmacht, recognizing the growing peril of being outproduced, embarked on a desperate campaign of innovation. Engineers and skilled craftsmen labored day and night in factories across Germany, from Kassel to Nuremberg, designing heavier tanks, improving existing models, and integrating increasingly complex weapon systems. Every turret, every hull, every transmission was meticulously calibrated. Soldiers and civilians alike worked tirelessly under harsh conditions, polishing armor, recalibrating 88mm and 76mm guns, and assembling intricate drive systems capable of supporting the weight of the new beasts rolling from the assembly lines. Hitler insisted on perfection, personally reviewing blueprints and prototypes. He believed that technical superiority, precision engineering, unmatched firepower, and impenetrable armor could counterbalance the numerical inferiority that increasingly threatened the Wehrmacht. Each new tank was intended to dominate any battlefield, to turn engagements into demonstrations of mechanical genius. Yet the very complexity that made these vehicles formidable also slowed production. A single heavy tank required hundreds of thousands of man-hours, countless specialized tools, and a crew of 5 trained operators who needed months of instruction to function effectively. Even minor mechanical faults could immobilize the vehicle for days or weeks, leaving it vulnerable to the relentless advance of Allied forces. Across the Atlantic, the American war machine continued to operate with unyielding efficiency. Sherman production lines in Detroit, Flint, and across the Midwest churned tanks day and night, unaffected by winter storms or labor shortages. The assembly process was optimized for speed and simplicity. Engines, transmissions, and turrets were built with interchangeability in mind. Modular components allowed crews and mechanics to repair or replace any major system in mere hours. Training camps mirrored the realities of the battlefield. Soldiers drilled on exact replicas of operational tanks, learning every sound, every movement, and every procedure until operation, maintenance, and repair became instinctive. Private Samuel Jenkins, 21, recalled, "We trained with the same tanks we would face in battle. Every broken track, every jammed gun, every engine failure we simulated made us faster, smarter, and ready to keep moving no matter what happened." This feedback loop of industrial production, hands-on training, and immediate field adaptation created an unstoppable rhythm. While German crews labored to perfect one tank, the Americans could deploy dozens of Shermans, repair them in hours, and sustain a relentless pressure on the front lines. Near Caen, Hauptmann Michael Wittmann gripped the radio handset with a growing sense of urgency. Snow clung to the tank's armor, and the cold had frozen rivets and joints in some areas. He addressed command in Berlin. "We are running out of fuel, spare parts delayed, Shermans keep coming, we cannot hold the line forever." The words were grim, but accurate. Even the Tiger, the pinnacle of German armor, could not escape the arithmetic of war. Wittmann knew that his tank, with its 88mm gun, sloped armor, and crew trained to near perfection, could destroy dozens of Shermans in a single engagement. Yet for every Sherman he destroyed, 2 more seemed to arrive within hours, backed by Red Ball Express convoys, air deliveries, and mobile repair teams. Precision, quality, and tactical genius were formidable, yet insufficient to stem the tide created by the industrial might of the United States. Each German tank immobilized by mechanical failure or destroyed in combat represented days, sometimes weeks, of waiting for replacements or repair, whereas Sherman crews faced a continuous stream of reinforcements. At the factories in Kassel, engineers and craftsmen labored under increasingly strict supervision. Blueprints for new heavy tanks, such as the Tiger II, demanded exacting standards. Every armor plate had to be perfect, every gun precisely aligned, every suspension system flawlessly tuned. Teams of men specialized in welding, machining, and assembly worked 12-hour shifts, often in freezing halls with minimal heating. Even small errors could have catastrophic effects in combat. Meanwhile, the Americans adapted and innovated to a different rhythm. Tank designs were simplified not for lack of ingenuity, but for efficiency and reliability. If a Sherman's track broke during a skirmish, it could be replaced in hours, sometimes mid-engagement. If an engine failed, a replacement was installed in the field by a trained crew, keeping the flow of armored units uninterrupted. ES. Emphasis on adaptability and repairability meant that quantity increasingly equaled battlefield advantage. In the frozen fields outside Caen, German crews faced mounting pressure. Snow and ice clung to their uniforms, weapons, and tanks. Mechanical failures were frequent, and fuel shortages hindered mobility. Tactical brilliance alone could not compensate for these limitations. Wittmann and his men executed maneuvers with precision, destroying enemy tanks with disciplined firing, exploiting terrain, and coordinating with artillery and infantry. Yet the relentless arrival of Shermans, accompanied by American infantry, artillery support, and supply convoys, steadily eroded their defensive positions. Each engagement left fewer German vehicles operational, each success increasingly overshadowed by the unyielding numerical superiority of the Allies. Morale, once bolstered by the pride of engineering mastery, began to fray. Soldiers and commanders realized that technical perfection could not overcome the overwhelming logistics and production capacity of the enemy. Back in Detroit, Mary Thompson, 26, tightened the final bolt on a Sherman turret, wiping sweat from her brow. The tank rolled off the line, ready to be shipped to Europe within days. Women like Mary had become indispensable to the American war effort, replacing men who had gone to fight, learning welding, machining, and assembly with remarkable skill. Factories operated with precision timing, coordinated with training centers and supply chains to ensure that each tank leaving the assembly line would immediately integrate into the battlefield strategy. American engineers continuously evaluated performance reports from Europe, simplifying designs, improving repairability, and adjusting armor and armaments to meet the evolving demands of combat. The feedback loop between the front and the factories ensured that every Sherman deployed was not only functional but optimized for endurance and repair, creating an unbroken chain of armored pressure against German positions. At nightfall, Wittmann reviewed reports from multiple fronts. Fuel and ammunition were dwindling, replacement parts were delayed, and morale among crews was visibly deteriorating. The arithmetic of war had shifted decisively. Even the most technically advanced German tanks, capable of extraordinary feats of firepower, could not match the relentless output and adaptability of American forces. He knew that every engagement bought time, but could not alter the fundamental reality. The Allies had industrial superiority, and numbers would decide the campaign. Tactical skill, once sufficient to dominate a battlefield, now served only to delay the inevitable. The German command attempted further innovation. Plans for even heavier tanks, advanced weapons systems, and experimental designs were drafted with urgency. Engineers, though exhausted, pushed the limits of metallurgy, weapon, design, and mechanical engineering. Precision, attention to detail, and perfection remained paramount. Yet these efforts were always constrained by the limits of time, resources, and the ever-expanding production of Sherman tanks by the Americans. Every new German design, no matter how formidable on paper, arrived too late to offset the numerical imbalance. American ingenuity, in the form of rapid production, training, and repair, effectively neutralized the technical advantages that German engineers labored to create. By the end of January 1944, the pattern was undeniable. The Allies continued to advance, supported by endless streams of tanks, fuel, and trained crews. The Germans fought valiantly, each Tiger and Panther a testament to skill and craftsmanship, yet these efforts were increasingly defensive, reactionary, and constrained by material shortages. Wittmann's reports reflected the growing desperation, the realization that technical brilliance alone could not overcome industrial might. Across Europe, morale began to fracture. Commanders questioned the feasibility of continued offensive operations, and soldiers braced themselves for the relentless pressure of a war where numbers, logistics, and adaptability increasingly dictated outcomes. In the freezing fields near Caen, German tanks continued to engage Shermans, artillery rumbled in support, and infantry maneuvered to cover advances or retreats. Every destroyed Sherman was a temporary victory, every immobilized Tiger a sobering reminder of limitations. Tactical skill remained essential, yet the arithmetic of war had become the deciding factor. The Allies could absorb losses, replace tanks, repair damage, and maintain relentless offensive momentum. German crews, no matter how well-trained or technically proficient, faced an enemy whose ability to sustain operations had become virtually limitless in comparison. The war, once fought by courage and skill alone, was now measured by production, logistics, and industrial adaptability. Hauptmann Wittmann, 33, gazed across the snow-laden battlefield, noting the fires from damaged Shermans and the tracks of his own Tigers cutting through frozen mud. He understood that the coming months would test the limits of German engineering and human endurance. Every engagement was a fight for survival. Every tactical decision weighed against a backdrop of industrial disparity. Precision, skill, and innovation could win skirmishes, inflict damage, and delay advances. But the inexorable force of numbers, sustained by American production and ingenuity, was reshaping the battlefield. In this new age of warfare, the arithmetic of steel, supply, and manpower had become the ultimate arbiter of victory. The Wehrmacht could innovate, craft, and strategize, yet industrial might, relentless and unyielding, dictated the course of the campaign, and German commanders began to accept a sobering truth. Perfection alone could not overcome. Ceaseless march of the Allied war machine. June 6, 1944 D-Day marked the beginning of a decisive turn in the war. Thousands of Allied tanks, mostly Shermans, rolled off the beaches and into the hedgerows of Normandy. Each Sherman represented not only firepower, but the relentless efficiency of American factories, the triumph of mass production, standardization, and logistics perfected over years. Across the fields outside Cayenne, Hauptmann Michael Wittmann commanded his Tiger Company, each tank a masterpiece of engineering and precision. For every Tiger, dozens of Shermans advanced relentlessly, their crews trained to operate and repair their vehicles with speed and coordination. Wittmann's Tigers destroyed several enemy tanks, yet reinforcements arrived faster than the Germans could count. Fuel shortages, damaged engines, and delayed spare parts compounded the pressure. Within days, the Wehrmacht confronted an unyielding truth. No tactical genius or technical superiority could counteract the overwhelming numerical advantage of the Allies. By July, German tank units were immobilized, worn down by constant engagement, fatigue, and the relentless surge of Sherman reinforcements. The strategic reality of industrial power became undeniable. While Germany focused on craftsmanship, perfection, and quality, the Allies relied on quantity, sustainment, and adaptability. 1,300 Panzers could not withstand 17,000 Shermans, and the mathematical certainty of Allied dominance reshaped the battlefield forever. Years later, veterans from both sides reflected on the war's decisive lessons. Michael Wittmann's battlefield heroics were remembered, yet the larger truth was clear. Tactical brilliance could win battles, but strategic production won wars. German panzers were engineering marvels, yet their scarcity left them powerless against the overwhelming numbers of Shermans. American mass production, simple design, and logistical mastery created a relentless advantage. Every destroyed Sherman was quickly replaced. Every Tiger required weeks, specialized tools, and expert crews. By 1943, the arithmetic of war was evident. 17,000 Shermans arrived, and the Wehrmacht could no longer keep pace. Quality and skill could not overcome quantity, supply, and adaptability. The Panzers were brilliant, the Shermans were unstoppable, and the fate of Europe was sealed. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.